A stranger's hands, a second chance. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of roasting chestnuts and fresh-baked bread as Olivia Hayes rushed through the crowded Manhattan streets, her messenger bag slung over her shoulder. She had just finished a grueling 12-hour shift at Street Vincent's ER, and exhaustion tugged at her bones. But she wasn't done for the night. Not yet. She had promised to pick up groceries for her elderly neighbor, Mrs. Moreno, who lived in the tiny apartment across the hall from hers. Olivia didn't break promises, even when her body begged for sleep. As she stepped onto Fifth Avenue, the towering skyline shimmered with neon lights. The world here was relentless, unforgiving. People walked past each other like ghosts, too busy to notice the lives unfolding around them. And then it happened. A sharp gasp, a muffled groan, and the sound of something heavy hitting the pavement. For a brief moment, the noise blended into the city's usual chaos, the honking of cabs, the chatter of pedestrians, the rhythmic tapping of dress shoes against the pavement. But then, a desperate voice. Someone called 911. The urgency in the woman's scream sent a jolt of adrenaline through Olivia. She turned, scanning the crowd, her trained eyes locking onto the source of the commotion. A man in an expensive charcoal gray suit lay crumpled on the sidewalk, his body sprawled out near the curb. His right hand clutched at his chest, his face contorted in agony. Heart attack. She had seen this 100 times before. Her bag hit the ground as she rushed forward, dropping to her knees beside him. "I'm a nurse," she announced, her voice cutting through the growing murmur of onlookers. "Give him space." His breaths were rapid and shallow, his skin paling by the second. Beads of sweat formed along his hairline, dampening his dark, neatly styled hair. His tie, a deep navy silk, was loosened but still too tight around his throat. Olivia's hands moved on instinct, years of experience guiding her actions. She loosened his tie, checked his pulse, and pressed her fingers against his wrist. Weak, erratic, dangerous. "Sir, can you hear me?" she asked, her tone steady but urgent. His eyelids fluttered. Green. That was the first thing Olivia noticed when he managed to crack them open. His eyes, deep, vibrant green, like fresh spring leaves, locked onto hers. His lips parted, but no words came. "Try to stay still," she instructed, her fingers steady on his wrist. "Help is on the way." His grip on his chest tightened, his breathing becoming even more labored. Not good. He needed oxygen. He needed a hospital. Now. She had seen enough men like him, powerful, wealthy, invincible in their own worlds. Ignore the warning signs. Workaholics who thought they could outsmart their own mortality. This man had clearly learned the hard way. "What's your name?" she asked, needing to keep him conscious. His mouth moved, his voice barely a whisper. Grayson. The name struck something familiar in her mind, but she didn't have time to place it. She focused on keeping him awake. "All right, Grayson, I need you to stay with me," she said, her grip firm but gentle on his arm. "Focus on my voice. Okay. Breathe with me." His fingers twitched slightly, and despite his pain, his gaze stayed on her. There was something in it, something beyond just pain or fear. Recognition. And then a hint of something else. Relief. As if in that moment, she was the only person in the world who had ever truly seen him. The sound of approaching sirens sliced through the night, but Olivia barely noticed. All she saw were those green eyes locked onto hers, filled with something unspoken. The ambulance pulled up, and 2 paramedics rushed out, moving with efficiency. "He's in cardiac distress," Olivia told them as they knelt beside her. "Pulse is irregular. BP is dropping." The paramedics nodded, quickly taking over, but as they lifted him onto the stretcher, his hand shot out, grasping her wrist. "Stay," he rasped. The grip wasn't desperate, it wasn't demanding. It was simply human. Olivia hesitated. She didn't know this man. She had no idea why he was looking at her like she was the only thing keeping him tethered to this world. But something about him, something about the way he had reached for her, made her squeeze his fingers back. "Don't worry," she said softly. "You're going to be okay." And as the ambulance doors close, whisking Grayson Calloway, one of the most powerful men in New York, into the night, Olivia found herself standing there, shaken in a way she hadn't been in years. Because somehow, in that fleeting moment, in that grasp of a stranger's hand, something had changed. And neither of them knew it yet, but that night would alter both of their lives forever. The walls we build, the truth we hide. The sterile white lights of the hospital room flickered softly, casting faint shadows along the pristine floors. Machines beeped in a steady rhythm, monitoring every breath, every heartbeat. Grayson Calloway lay still against crisp white sheets, his gaze fixed on the ceiling. He was alive. Barely. His fingers curled against the blanket, muscles weak, body drained. He had spent his entire life ignoring pain, pushing through exhaustion, and telling himself he was untouchable. But tonight, reality had finally caught up with him. A heart attack. The phrase felt foreign, impossible, even. It wasn't supposed to happen to him. Not now. Not when he had everything. Money, power, influence. He had built an empire from nothing, clawed his way up from a life of struggle to become the man every billionaire in New York feared and respected. And yet, none of it had mattered when he had collapsed on that sidewalk. None of it had saved him. The only thing that had. A stranger's hands. The nurse. Olivia. He could still see her face, those dark brown eyes filled with sharp intelligence and quiet strength, the way her voice had cut through the chaos, grounding him in a moment when he could have easily slipped away. She had saved him. And then she had disappeared. His jaw clenched at the thought. She had been there. She had seen him at his weakest. And then she had left, like he was just another patient, just another stranger in the endless rush of people she helped. But she wasn't just anyone. And Grayson Calloway never forgot the people who changed his life. The hospital door opened, snapping him out of his thoughts. A man in a white coat stepped inside, flipping through a clipboard. "Mr. Calloway," the doctor greeted, glancing up. "I see you're awake." Grayson didn't respond. He wasn't interested in pleasantries. How bad was it? He asked instead, his voice rough from disuse. The doctor sighed, stepping closer. "You suffered a mild heart attack, but it could have been far worse. Your body has been under extreme stress. Your blood pressure is dangerously high, and your heart is fixable." Grayson interrupted. The doctor exhaled sharply. "Only if you start listening for once in your life." Grayson smirked despite himself. "Do I know you?" The doctor gave him a flat look. "I've treated your executives before. You work them to the bone, just like yourself. And now, you're the one on this bed." Grayson didn't argue. There was no point. He had heard it all before. "You need a lifestyle change," the doctor continued. "You need to slow down, manage your stress, exercise, get some actual sleep." Grayson chuckled, the sound dry and humorless. "Slow down. Doctor, I run half of Manhattan." The doctor snapped the clipboard shut. "And if you keep running yourself into the ground, you won't be running anything at all." For the first time, something cold coiled in Grayson's chest. Death had never felt real to him before. Not until now. The doctor turned to leave but then hesitated. "Oh, and Mr. Calloway." Grayson arched a brow. "The nurse who helped you on Fifth Avenue." The doctor tapped his clipboard. "She saved your life. You should probably thank her." And with that, he was gone. "She was just another patient to me." Olivia sighed, rubbing at the tension in her neck as she sat in the dimly lit break room of St. Vincent's Hospital. It had been 3 days since she had saved Grayson Calloway. 3 days of not thinking about him. At least, that's what she told herself. "Hey, Liv," a voice called out. She glanced up to see Nurse Rebecca leaning against the doorway, arms crossed. "You're famous, you know." Olivia frowned. "What?" Rebecca smirked, tossing a folded-up newspaper onto the table. Olivia hesitated before picking it up. The headline made her freeze. Grayson Calloway's near-death scare. The woman who saved him. Beneath it was a blurry, zoomed-in picture from that night, a shot of her kneeling beside him on the sidewalk, hands pressed against his chest, her face twisted in concentration. Olivia's stomach dropped. She hated attention. "You," she groaned, dropping the paper. "Why do people care?" Rebecca snorted. "Because he's one of the richest, most powerful men in the country, and you literally saved his life." Olivia shook her head. "I was just doing my job." Rebecca leaned closer. "You know he asked about you, right?" Olivia stiffened. "What?" "2 of his bodyguards were here earlier, asking around. Didn't say much, but they were definitely looking for you." A strange feeling settled in Olivia's stomach. Why would a man like him care? He had everything. She was just a nurse, a nobody in his world. The last thing she needed was some billionaire feeling indebted to her. So she made a decision. One she had made years ago, when she had learned that rich, powerful men could never be trusted. She would stay as far away from Grayson Calloway as possible. The hunter becomes the hunted. The sleek black car pulled up outside the hospital's emergency entrance, its tinted windows reflecting the glow of streetlights. Inside, Grayson sat silently, watching as nurses and doctors moved in and out of the hospital, their lives filled with purpose. He wondered what that felt like. What it was like to work for something more than power. A man cleared his throat from the driver's seat. "Sir," his head of security, Carter, said. "Are you sure about this?" Grayson smirked. "Are you questioning me, Carter?" Carter hesitated. "No, sir. It's just, this isn't usually your style." Grayson knew what he meant. Normally, when he wanted something, or someone, he didn't show up personally. He sent people. He pulled strings. He made it happen. But this wasn't business. This wasn't some deal. This was different. Because Olivia Hayes wasn't like the others. She didn't know who he was that night. She didn't care. And that was what made her matter. Grayson stepped out of the car, adjusting the sleeves of his tailored coat. Time to find a woman who had saved him. And more importantly, time to find out why, for the first time in his life, he couldn't stop thinking about someone. Unfinished conversations. Unspoken truths. Olivia was good at disappearing. Not literally, of course. But she knew how to fade into the background, how to slip past the chaos of a crowded hospital without drawing attention to herself. It was a skill she had mastered over the years, a survival instinct she had learned the hard way. So when she heard whispers that Grayson Calloway was looking for her, she did what she always did. She vanished. She swapped shifts with another nurse, took her breaks in the quietest parts of the hospital, ducked into supply closets when she saw his bodyguards lurking near the nurse's station, because Olivia knew what happened when powerful men took an interest in people like her. She had lived through it once. She wasn't going to let it happen again. The hunt begins. Grayson had spent the last 2 days trying to find her, and he was not used to being ignored. Women chased him, not the other way around. But Olivia Hayes, she was a damn ghost. His security team had tried tracking her schedule, but she was unpredictable. She worked double shifts, switched floors, and never stayed in one place long enough to be found. That only made him more determined. It wasn't just about thanking her anymore. It was about understanding her. Because Olivia wasn't like the women in his world, the ones who fawned over his wealth, who flirted with him for power, who saw him as a walking, breathing bank account. She had saved his life. And then, she had walked away, like he was just another patient, like he was nothing. And for a man like him, that was unacceptable. Which was why, at 11:42 p.m. on a Thursday night, Grayson Calloway found himself standing in a dimly lit hospital hallway, leaning against a wall, waiting. His security detail had pinpointed Olivia's break schedule, and after 72 hours of searching, he was finally going to get his chance. When she turned the corner, her dark hair pulled into a messy bun, her scrubs slightly wrinkled from exhaustion, he knew instantly this was his moment. She froze the second she saw him. Her entire body went rigid, her hand tightening around the strap of her messenger bag. And then, she turned around and walked the other way. Unbelievable. Grayson pushed off the wall and strode after her. "Running from me, Nurse Hayes," he called. She didn't stop. Her pace quickened, her steps sharp and purposeful. Grayson smirked. She thought she could outrun him. She clearly didn't know who she was dealing with. With his long strides, it took seconds to catch up. He grabbed her elbow, gently, but firmly enough to stop her. Olivia tensed. "Let me go," she said, her voice even, but the warning in her tone was clear. Grayson didn't. Instead, he slowly released his grip, stepping back. "I just want to talk," he said, watching her carefully. Olivia turned to face him, crossing her arms. "Talk," she echoed. "What exactly does a billionaire CEO have to talk about with a nurse who makes barely enough to pay rent?" Grayson grinned. She was feisty. "I don't know," he said. "Maybe the fact that you saved my life." Olivia's expression didn't change. "I was just doing my job." Grayson arched a brow. "You really expect me to believe that?" She exhaled sharply, shaking her head. "Look, Mr. Calloway." "Grayson." She ignored him. "You don't owe me anything. I don't want money. I don't need favors, so let's just forget this ever happened, all right?" Grayson's jaw tightened. Was that what she thought? That he was here to buy her gratitude? He took a slow step forward, his voice quieter this time. "This isn't about money." Olivia studied him for a long moment, her sharp eyes searching his. And then, softer than before, she asked, "Then what is this about?" For the first time in a very long time, Grayson didn't have an answer. Because he wasn't sure himself. He just knew that since that night, he hadn't been able to stop thinking about her. And that scared him more than anything. A past that won't stay buried. Grayson was persistent. No matter how many times Olivia ignored him, avoided him, or shut down his attempts at conversation, he kept showing up. He wasn't demanding. He wasn't pushy. He just kept being there. At first, it was frustrating. Then, it was unnerving. Because Olivia wasn't used to people staying. Not men like him. Men who had everything. She had learned long ago that men like Grayson Calloway didn't chase women like her. Not for real. Not without expecting something in return. Her ex had taught her that lesson well. The man who had promised her the world, only to shatter it the second things got hard. The man who had walked away when their life together wasn't convenient anymore. And Olivia wasn't going to make that mistake twice. Which was why, the next time Grayson found her at the hospital's rooftop lounge, her one place of peace, she finally snapped. "Why are you doing this?" she demanded, spinning to face him. Grayson paused, caught off guard by the fire in her eyes. "Doing what?" Olivia's fists clenched. "This, following me, showing up at my job. Acting like this matters to you." Grayson held her gaze. "Because it does." Silence stretched between them. And then Olivia did something she never did. She let her walls crack. She let the anger, the pain, the fear she had buried for years spill out. "No, it doesn't," she snapped. "Men like you don't care about women like me. You live in a different world. A world where everything has a price. A world where feelings are just." She broke off, shaking her head. Grayson stepped closer. And when he spoke, his voice was quiet. "Maybe you're right." Olivia blinked, startled. Grayson sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted. "I don't know how to make you believe me." She stared at him, her chest tight. "I just know," he continued, "that ever since that night, I haven't been able to stop thinking about you. Olivia swallowed hard. This isn't a game to me. His voice was almost raw now. And I'm not used to not knowing what I want. But the only thing I know for sure. He met her eyes. I don't want to walk away from this. From you. Olivia felt the words in her chest. Felt the weight behind them. And for the first time in years, she was terrified. Because she wanted to believe him. She really, really did. But believing meant risking something she wasn't sure she could afford to lose again. Her heart. And that was the one thing she had vowed never to give away again. A battle of hearts and walls. Olivia wasn't sure what scared her more. The fact that Grayson Calloway was still chasing her, or the fact that a part of her wanted to stop running. She sat on the edge of the hospital rooftop, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. The sounds of Manhattan pulsed below, but up here, it was quiet. This was the one place where she could think, where she could breathe. But tonight, there was no peace. Not with him standing behind her. You never answered me. Grayson's voice was deep, steady, too steady. She didn't turn around. Answered what? Why you keep running from me? Olivia exhaled sharply. Because you don't belong in my world, Calloway. She heard his footsteps, slow and deliberate, as he approached. Then explain something to me, he said. Why do I feel like I've never belonged anywhere more than I do right now? Olivia clenched her jaw. She couldn't afford to let his words get to her. She wouldn't. This isn't a fairy tale, she said, standing up and finally facing him. You're rich. You're powerful. You live in a world where everything is calculated, where you're used to controlling every outcome. He didn't deny it. She took a step closer, her voice firm. And me. I don't do calculated. I don't do controlled. I've spent my whole life surviving. I can't afford to be reckless, Grayson. Not with my heart. Something flickered in his green eyes. Something real. Then don't be reckless, he said quietly. Be brave. Olivia felt something tighten in her chest. God, she hated him for saying things like that. For making her heart beat in ways it hadn't in years. I have a son, she blurted out. The words hung between them, heavy and unspoken. She hadn't meant to say it, hadn't meant to reveal that part of her. But it was too late now. Grayson didn't react the way most men did. He didn't look shocked. He didn't take a step back. He just nodded. I know, he said simply. Olivia stiffened. You had me investigated. His jaw clenched. Yes, of course he had. Olivia crossed her arms. And let me guess, you know everything about me now. My past, my struggles, the fact that I worked 2 jobs just to make sure my son gets the life he deserves. Grayson's gaze softened. I know enough to understand that you're the strongest person I have ever met. She hated that his words made her want to cry. She shook her head. You don't get it. Then make me get it, he countered. Help me understand, Olivia. Her breath hitched. How did she explain? How did she tell him that she had already loved once, and that love had ruined her? How did she explain that she had trusted a man before, only to be left in the wreckage when he decided that she and her son weren't worth the effort? She couldn't. Because if she did, she might actually start to believe that Grayson Calloway was different. And believing in someone like him. That was the most dangerous thing she could do. The walls he never noticed were there. Grayson wasn't used to feeling powerless. But as he watched Olivia wrestle with emotions she refused to voice, he realized something. This woman had walls higher than any he had ever seen. And for the first time in his life, he wanted to climb them. He took a deep breath. I know you don't trust me. Her laugh was bitter. That's an understatement. I know you think I have some ulterior motive. She arched a brow. Don't you? Grayson hesitated. Not in the way you think. She shook her head. Then why? Why are you still here? Because I can't stop thinking about you. Because you make me want to be a better man. Because when I look at you, I finally understand what I've been missing my entire life. Grayson didn't say any of those things. Instead, he said, Because I see you, Olivia. She blinked. What? I see you, he repeated, voice steady. Not just as the nurse who saved my life. Not just as some struggling single mom. I see you, the woman who keeps pushing forward no matter how many times life knocks her down. The woman who still chooses to care, even when the world gives her every reason not to. Silence. Grayson let the words settle, watching as Olivia's expression shifted, anger fading into something else, something closer to fear. And he knew, right then and there, that this wasn't about him. This was about her. About the scars she carried. The ones she had long since buried. The ones she didn't let anyone see. Tell me something, he said softly. She looked wary. What? Has anyone ever fought for you before? Her breath caught, and he had his answer. No. No one had ever fought for Olivia Hayes. Until now. Not everything can be bought. That night, Olivia couldn't sleep. Her mind kept replaying Grayson's words. Not because she believed them, but because she wanted to. For the first time in years, she found herself questioning the walls she had built. Not tearing them down, but wondering if maybe, just maybe, she had spent too long hiding behind them. The next morning, she went to work determined to keep her distance, to pretend like their rooftop conversation had never happened. But the universe had other plans. Because the first thing she saw when she walked into the pediatric unit was Grayson Calloway, sitting on the floor, with her son. Her breath stalled. Noah was laughing, as Grayson held up a stuffed dinosaur, making it stomp across the tile like some kind of ferocious beast. Noah, Olivia said, her voice sharp. Her son looked up, beaming. Mommy. Mr. Calloway says that if dinosaurs were still around, they'd totally be doctors because they have really strong arms for carrying patients. Olivia blinked. Grayson smirked. I stand by that theory. Her heart pounded. This was not supposed to happen. Grayson wasn't supposed to be here. Wasn't supposed to know Noah. And yet here he was, in her world, in a way no man ever had been before. And she had no idea what to do about it. When walls began to crack, Olivia's pulse pounded in her ears. Grayson Calloway, one of the most powerful, untouchable men in New York, was sitting cross-legged on the pediatric floor of Street Vincent's, playing dinosaurs with her son. Noah, completely unaware of the tension thrumming through his mother's body, continued his excited chatter, holding up a bright green T-Rex. Mr. Calloway says that velociraptors were probably the best doctors because they were fast and super smart. Grayson smirked, eyes twinkling. It's basic logic. Olivia didn't move. Her son had never warmed up to anyone this fast. Not teachers, not babysitters, not even the well-meaning parents of his classmates. And yet here he was, comfortable, open, trusting, with Grayson Calloway. She forced her legs to work, stepping closer, keeping her voice calm. Noah, sweetie, why don't you go pick out a book from the shelf? I need to talk to Mr. Calloway for a moment. Noah hesitated, glancing between the two adults. You're not gonna fight, are you? Olivia's throat tightened. Grayson, to his credit, didn't look smug. Instead, he smiled gently. No fighting. Just grown-up talking. Satisfied, Noah nodded and scampered off toward the hospital's small library corner. As soon as he was out of earshot, Olivia whipped around. Her voice was low but fierce. What the hell are you doing here? Grayson slowly stood, brushing imaginary dust off his ridiculously expensive slacks. Having an intelligent debate on the medical capabilities of dinosaurs, he said smoothly. She wasn't amused. Grayson, she snapped. How do you even know Noah's in this unit? His smirk disappeared. I didn't, he admitted. I came to check on some things and I saw him. We started talking. Olivia narrowed her eyes. And you just sat down on the floor. His lips quirked. I don't know if you've noticed, but your kid has some pretty strong opinions about prehistoric creatures. I had to hold my ground. Olivia crossed her arms. She didn't know what bothered her more, the fact that Grayson had been here, or the fact that he was good with no. Too good. He didn't talk down to him like most adults did. Didn't brush him off. Didn't act like he was doing charity work by entertaining a kid. He just talked to him like he mattered. And that terrified her. Because Olivia knew better than anyone what happened when a man like Grayson Calloway stepped into your world. They didn't stay. They made promises. They made you believe. And then they left. She had lived through it before. She would not live through it again. So she took a deep breath, hardened her resolve, and said the only thing she could. I need you to stay away from my son. Grayson's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did. For a long moment, he didn't say anything. And then, why? Olivia exhaled sharply. Because he's just a kid. And I'm what? She struggled for the right words. You're a man who doesn't stick around, she said finally. You're used to getting what you want, and when it stops being exciting, you move on. That's fine if you want to play games with me, but you don't get to involve him. Something flashed across Grayson's face, something Olivia couldn't quite read. I don't play games, he said quietly. She scoffed. Right. I don't, he repeated. And if you actually knew me, you'd understand that. Olivia swallowed hard. She didn't know him. Not really. She knew his reputation. She knew the kind of man he used to be. But maybe, just maybe, he wasn't that man anymore. And that scared her more than anything. Because if Grayson Calloway wasn't the heartless billionaire she had built up in her mind, then what was left? A man who might actually care. And she didn't have room for that. Not now. Not ever. So she doubled down. You can tell yourself whatever you want. But it's not going anywhere, she said firmly. Noah has been through enough. I won't let you make him think you're something you're not. Grayson's gaze turned sharp. And what do you think I am? She hesitated. And that was all he needed. Let me guess, he said, stepping closer. You think I'm cold, that I don't care, that all I see are numbers and deals and profit margins. Her lips pressed together. You think I'm just another powerful man who uses people like currency. She didn't answer. But she didn't have to. Grayson let out a quiet, humorless laugh. You want to know the truth, Olivia. She braced herself. I was that man, he admitted, for a long time. That threw her off. She had expected denial, arrogance, excuses, not honesty. But ever since that night on Fifth Avenue, I haven't been able to shake this feeling, he continued. This awareness that maybe, just maybe, I was living my life the wrong way. Olivia swallowed. And what? You think I'm some kind of redemption story for you? No, he said softly. I think you're the first real thing that's ever happened to me. Her breath hitched. Because he meant it. She could see it in his eyes, hear it in his voice. Grayson Calloway wasn't chasing her because he was bored. He wasn't chasing her because she was a challenge. He was chasing her because he wanted her to stop running. And Olivia? She wasn't sure if she could, because running had kept her safe. Running had kept her heart intact. And now, for the first time in years, she didn't know what to do. An invitation she shouldn't accept. That night, Olivia stared at the card in her hand. A simple, elegant white invitation. Grayson Calloway requests the pleasure of your company for dinner. No fancy restaurant name. No address. Just a private number and a handwritten note. No expectations. No pressure. Just one dinner. Olivia knew she should say no. But deep down, she also knew something else. If she didn't go, she might spend the rest of her life wondering what would have happened if she had. And for someone who had spent years running, that was a terrifying thought. A dinner that changes everything. The invitation sat on Olivia's kitchen counter for 2 days. She had told herself she wouldn't go. That she shouldn't go. That having dinner with Grayson Calloway was the worst possible idea. But here she was, standing outside an elegant townhouse in the West Village, gripping the invitation like it was a grenade that could go off at any moment. She could still turn around. She could still walk away. But something deep in her gut told her that if she did, she might regret it. So she took a deep breath, exhaled slowly, and knocked. The door opened almost immediately. And there he was. Grayson Calloway, standing in a simple button-down and slacks, looking annoyingly perfect. But not in the carefully curated billionaire way she had seen in business magazines. He looked relaxed, like he wasn't trying to impress her, like he just wanted her there. "Hey," he said. Olivia swallowed. "Hey." They stared at each other for a moment before Grayson stepped aside. "Come in." She hesitated. But then she did. This wasn't what she expected. Olivia had expected something grand. A penthouse, a chandelier that probably cost more than her yearly salary, a staff of butlers waiting to take her coat. But this was normal. The townhouse was elegant but understated. Dark wood floors, warm lighting, a cozy seating area with bookshelves lining the walls. Not a single gold-plated surface in sight. "You look disappointed," Grayson mused, shutting the door behind her. She raised an eyebrow. "I was expecting something more excessive." He smirked, sorry to ruin the stereotype. He led her to the dining area, where a home-cooked meal was already set on the table. Olivia blinked. "You cooked?" Grayson gave her a flat look. "I might be rich, Olivia, but I know how to use a stove." She crossed her arms. "Did you, though?" He sighed. "No, my chef did, but I supervised." She laughed despite herself. "Sit," he said, pulling out a chair for her. "Eat." Olivia hesitated before sitting. The food smelled amazing, but she wasn't here for the meal. She was here for answers. So as they ate, she watched him carefully, studied him, tried to figure him out. But Grayson? He wasn't playing whatever game she thought he would. He didn't try to impress her, didn't drown her in charm or flirtation. He just talked about his childhood, about how he had grown up in a rundown apartment with a single mother who worked 3 jobs just to keep them afloat, about how he had clawed his way out of poverty with sheer determination and ruthlessness. And Olivia, she found herself listening, really listening, because for the first time she realized something. Grayson Calloway wasn't the man she had assumed he was. And that was dangerous, because the more she learned about him, the harder it became to hate him. The question that changed the night. Halfway through dinner, Grayson put down his fork and leaned back. His green eyes locked onto hers. "Ask me anything." Olivia raised a brow. "What?" He smirked. "You came here for answers, didn't you? So ask me anything. No lies. No dodging." She didn't hesitate. "Why me?" Grayson's smirk disappeared. His gaze turned serious, because he knew exactly what she was asking. Why was he chasing her? Why not one of the countless women who actually wanted him? He exhaled. "Because you don't care who I am." Olivia frowned. "That's not true." He shook his head. "It is. You didn't know who I was when you saved me. And even after you did, you still looked at me like I was just some guy. Not a billionaire. Not a CEO. Just a man." She stared at him. "That shouldn't mean anything," she said. "But it does." Silence settled between them. And Olivia. She felt something shift. Because for all of her running, for all of her pushing him away, she couldn't deny what she already knew. Grayson Calloway was different. But different didn't mean safe. Different didn't mean she could trust him. So she steeled herself. "Grayson," she said carefully, "I'm not looking for anything. I'm a single mom. My life is complicated. I don't do casual. I don't do games." His gaze didn't waver. "Neither do I." She let out a small, humorless laugh. "You expect me to believe that?" He leaned forward. "I don't expect anything. I just want you to give me the chance to prove it. Olivia swallowed. Because the worst part, she wanted to. She wanted to believe him. And that scared her more than anything. A goodbye that didn't feel like one. By the time Olivia stood to leave, something had changed between them. Something unspoken. Something real. Grayson walked her to the door, hands in his pockets, watching her carefully. "So," he said, "would it be too forward to ask if you'll have dinner with me again?" She smirked. "That depends. Will you actually cook next time?" His eyes twinkled. "I make excellent toast." She laughed. And damn it, she hadn't meant to. Because laughing meant she was comfortable. And comfortable meant she was letting her guard down. Grayson took a slow step closer. Not enough to invade her space, but enough to make her feel it. The tension, the pull, the something between them that neither of them wanted to name. "Give me a chance, Olivia." His voice was quiet, steady, honest. She exhaled. "I don't know if I can." He studied her. "Why?" "Because I've been hurt before. Because I don't trust myself with you. Because if I let myself fall, I don't know if I'll be able to stop." She didn't say any of that. Instead, she whispered, "Because I don't know if I want to." It was the truth. A terrifying, brutal, unspoken truth. Grayson didn't push, didn't try to convince her. He just nodded. "Then I'll wait." And somehow, that was even more dangerous. Because if there was one thing she had never had in her life, it was a man who was willing to wait. A love neither of them were ready for. Olivia wasn't used to this. She wasn't used to waiting. To anticipation. To the feeling of someone lingering in her life without demanding anything in return. But that's exactly what Grayson Calloway was doing. He wasn't pushing. Wasn't forcing his way into her world. He was just there. And the more she tried to pretend it didn't affect her, the more she realized it did. Because for the first time in years, she wasn't running. And she didn't know if that was a good thing. Unspoken words, unbreakable walls. Olivia sat on the couch, staring at her phone, debating. Grayson had sent a text. Simple, direct. "Grayson, no pressure, but I have an extra ticket to the city's new dinosaur exhibit. Thought Noah might like it." She exhaled. Of course, he had thought about no. Of course, he had picked the one thing that would make saying no impossible. She didn't trust this. Didn't trust him. And yet, Mommy. Noah burst into the room, eyes bright. "Guess what? My teacher said there's a new dino exhibit in the city. Can we go? Please." Olivia hesitated. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about Noah. And she had spent so much of her life making decisions based on fear. Maybe it was time to make one based on something else. She picked up her phone. Typed. "Olivia, what time?" A day that was supposed to be just for Noah. The museum was packed. Children ran through the halls, their excited voices echoing off the walls as towering skeletons loomed above them. Grayson was waiting near the entrance, dressed casually in a sweater and jeans. And Olivia hated the way her stomach tightened at the sight of him. He looked different. Less like a CEO. More like a man. And that was dangerous. Because the more human he seemed, the harder it became to keep her walls up. Noah, on the other hand, had no hesitation. "Mr. Calloway." He beamed, running up to him. "Did you know that the T-Rex's teeth were the size of a banana?" Grayson smirked. "I did. But did you know that scientists now think it had feathers?" Noah's eyes widened. No way. They started walking, the two of them talking like old friends. And Olivia? She followed behind, watching, studying, trying to figure out what the hell was happening. A moment that shouldn't have mattered, but did. Halfway through the exhibit, Noah tugged on Olivia's sleeve. "Mommy, I have to go to the bathroom." Olivia nodded. "All right, let's go find it." "I can take him," Grayson offered. Olivia froze. It was such a small thing. So simple. But letting someone else, A man. Take Noah anywhere. That was something she had never done before. She hesitated for too long. Grayson seemed to notice, and instead of pushing, he just nodded. "It's okay," he said, voice gentle. "You don't have to say yes." Olivia exhaled. "No, it's not that. I don't usually." "I know." He didn't say it with judgment, just understanding. And that made it worse, because it made her want to trust him. And trust was something she didn't give away. Not anymore. Not ever. The first crack in the walls she built. She let Grayson take Noah, and it shouldn't have been a big deal. But when she saw them return, Noah laughing, Grayson ruffling his hair like it was the most natural thing in the world, it felt like something shifted. Something she couldn't ignore. Because Noah liked him. Because Grayson fit in a way no one else ever had. And that scared her more than anything. The question she wasn't ready for. As they left the museum, Noah still buzzing with excitement, Grayson turned to Olivia. "You want to grab some food?" She hesitated. Not because she didn't want to, but because she did. And that was dangerous. Too dangerous. "I should get Noah home," she said instead. Grayson nodded. Of course. No pushback. No disappointment. Just acceptance. And for some reason, that made it even harder. Because if he had argued, she could have convinced herself that he was just like the rest. But he wasn't. And that was the problem. A moment. That was too easy. Later that night, Olivia tucked Noah into bed. "Did you have fun today, buddy?" she asked, smoothing his hair. Noah grinned. "Yeah, Mr. Calloway is really cool." Olivia's stomach tightened. She forced a smile. "Yeah, he is." Noah yawned. "Do you like him?" She froze. Her heart stopped. And then, before she could answer, Noah was already asleep. But she wasn't. And as she sat there, watching her son breathe peacefully, she realized something. She had spent so long keeping men out of their lives. So long being afraid. And now she wasn't just afraid of getting hurt. She was afraid that for the first time in years, she actually wanted to let someone in. A call that shouldn't have happened. She shouldn't have picked up the phone. Shouldn't have dialed his number. But that night, as she sat in her apartment, heart too full of emotions she didn't understand, she called him anyway. The line rang once. Twice. Then, "You okay?" Grayson's voice was rough with sleep. She exhaled. "I don't know." A pause. Then softly, "Do you want to talk?" She swallowed. Because for the first time in years, she did. Not because she needed help. Not because she needed saving. But because Grayson Calloway was becoming something real. Something dangerous. Something she wasn't ready for. And yet, for the first time, she didn't hang up. She just sat there. Listening. Breathing. And realizing that maybe, just maybe, she was already falling. The moment everything changes, the line was silent. Not the heavy, awkward kind of silence, but the kind that meant something. The kind that stretched between two people who were on the edge of something undeniable, but were too afraid to say it out loud. Olivia shouldn't have called him. But she had. And now here she was, sitting in the dim glow of her small apartment, staring at the wall, phone pressed to her ear, listening to Grayson Calloway's breathing on the other end. Olivia. His voice was quiet. Steady. Waiting. She swallowed hard. "I don't know why I called," she admitted. Grayson hummed. "I have a few guesses." She let out a small laugh. "Of course you do." Silence again. Then, "Do you want me to come over?" Her breath hitched. She should say no. She should hang up. But then she heard herself whispering, "Yeah." The final line she crosses. 20 minutes later, there was a knock at her door. Olivia opened it without thinking. And there he was, Grayson Calloway, in a plain black t-shirt and jeans, looking nothing like the billionaire CEO she had spent months trying to push away. He looked real. And that was what scared her the most. They stood there, staring at each other. Then, "I don't know how to do this," she admitted. Grayson exhaled slowly. "You don't have to know," he said. "Just let me in." And for the first time in years, he did. Not just into her apartment, but into her life. The moment they stopped pretending. They sat on the couch, both hesitant, both unsure of what this meant. Then, quietly, Olivia spoke. "Noah likes you." Grayson nodded. "Yeah, I like him too." She turned to him. "That's the problem." His brows furrowed. "Why?" "Because you don't just walk into a kid's life unless you plan on staying." Grayson's gaze darkened. "I know." She licked her lips. "So if this is just some kind of—" "It's not." The words were firm. No hesitation. No doubt. And Olivia? She had spent her life with men who couldn't make up their minds. Men who left when things got hard. But Grayson Calloway wasn't like them. He was a man who knew exactly what he wanted. And for the first time she was it. She exhaled. "This is terrifying." He smirked. "Yeah, it is." Then softer. "But I'm not going anywhere." And that was the moment. The moment everything changed. Because Olivia Hayes had spent years believing that love was just another word for broken promises. But for the first time, she started to wonder if maybe, just maybe, it didn't have to be. 6 months later, Noah was buzzing with excitement. Is he here yet? He asked for the third time, bouncing on his heels. Olivia smirked, ruffling his hair. "Calm down, bud." Her son huffed. "I am calm." She laughed. "No, you're not." Before Noah could argue, there was a knock at the door. And like a rocket, he ran to open it. Grayson stood on the other side, holding a wrapped box. Noah's eyes widened. "You got me something." Grayson smirked. "You bet I did." He handed it over, and Noah ripped into it immediately. Inside was a brand new dinosaur encyclopedia, complete with interactive buttons and sounds. Noah squealed. "This is awesome." Grayson chuckled. "I figured the future world's greatest paleontologist should have the best research material." Noah grinned. "Mommy, can we read it together tonight?" Olivia froze. Because for the first time, her son wasn't just talking about her. He was including Grayson too. Her heart twisted. Because Noah wasn't just accepting him. He already saw him as family. And Olivia, she wasn't far behind. A love that was never supposed to happen. Later that night, after Noah had fallen asleep, Olivia and Grayson sat on the couch, quietly drinking coffee. Grayson broke the silence first. "I love you, you know." Olivia's breath caught. He said it so easily, like it wasn't terrifying. Like it wasn't the single most dangerous thing in the world. But for once, she didn't want to run. She turned to him, met his eyes, and finally let herself believe it. "I love you too." Grayson smiled. Not the smug, arrogant smirk she had seen before, but a real, genuine smile. The kind of smile that said, "I will fight for you. I will stay. I will never be like the men who left." And Olivia, for the first time in forever, she let herself believe it. Because maybe, just maybe, this wasn't just a love story. Maybe this was the beginning of forever.